The Sunday before Christmas, the Christmas worship service, and Brother Tom is the point man on that. If you have any questions, see him. We would like to provide some pastries, and Brother Bill is in charge of that. He and his wife will be picking up some pastries. If you can help provide pastries this Sunday for kind of a Christmas breakfast, kind of an idea, please get with Brother Bill, and you guys can coordinate something. We'll have coffee as usual. I will not be here. My family will be up in Indiana. And so, good luck. All right. Just kidding. Whatever. All right, here we go. The first Sunday of the new year is the prospective member luncheon. And so if you'd like to get any questions answered about church membership, please join us for lunch that day. And Vision Sunday is the second Sunday, where we'll be announcing the new theme and some of the things on the calendar, some new things on the calendar, some recurring, exciting things on the calendar. We're kind of getting into our groove. All right, so some things that we're getting pretty good at, and we'll have those on the calendar. Underground Church is coming up that second Sunday in the evening. We'll be over in the new annex. It won't be put together yet, so you got to bring like a lawn chair, a folding chair, a bean bag, bring something over to sit on. You got to wear your casual clothes, and we want to kind of be aware of our brothers and sisters around the world. And this really kind of just, it took place because I told Isaac, I said, hey, man, we're not going to have a Sunday night meeting place. All we have is a garage. And he said, you know, that we're from China. That's what we do. And so what a great idea. All right, so now we're going to really get an idea of what it's like to be a Christian illegally. Actually, we won't have any idea, but we're going to try. All right, we're going to try. And so come and pray I don't make you use the back door, you know, in the dark of night. Nah, it'll be fun. And the ladies are bringing some rice and noodles and stuff, and we'll have a wonderful time of fellowship. And January 14th, this is a Tuesday night, we'll have West Coast Baptist College with us. I'm not sure if it's a girls group or not. That's an old picture. But there's a music group. And Pastor Jim Blaylock is going to be preaching for us. And it's always a blessing to hear from him. So that'll be Tuesday. There will be no Wednesday service that week. This is the service. And so you'll want to be here for that. You get some good singing. And by the way, West Coast always brings media to sell. So you can get books, you can get CDs. And I recommend you do that because they have really good quality materials, some good gospel music and so forth. Ladies, fellowship is coming out. I don't know why that screen is miscolored. That's weird. Didn't mean for the ladies to be gray. It's pink. All right, so Mercy and Truth. This is the ladies' conference. There's little thingies out there, little bookmarks. Yeah. Right, 12 through 17. I don't know, that's from their website. I guess that means they're all invited. But yeah, it's ages 12 and older. You need to register online, but if you'd like to share in the hotel room with the Vero ladies, then you need to sign up over here. So register for the event online, but at the table for the hotel. All right, now for the annex, please be in prayer, and let's work together on this. We need about $5,000 to move forward on this thing, and so what we're doing, one of the great blessings with this facility is we're getting the first month of January for half the price, and he's working with us on this. He wanted us to get us in there quickly. I said, you know, hey. Anyways, we're getting in there January to start fixing it up and painting and doing the things that we need to do. And then February technically starts the loan or the lease, but we need $5,000. And friends, I would encourage you to give to this. Pray how the Lord would use you. I know that we're going to work hard, but we need to give by faith, give by love and give by faith. And we're going to take about a month to do this. And I've reached out to some of our outside supporters that have helped us in the past, but this really is going to be a step of faith on our part. And by the way, there's a letter out there on the information table if you want to take it with you. It's got the kind of the explanation of what we're doing here. And so you're welcome to take one of those letters home with you and then put it somewhere where you'll remind yourself to pray and to give. You know, I mentioned to Brother Tom like a week ago, I said, oh, this is no problem. We have $5,000. It's just not in the church bank account. It's in our bank accounts. All right. So we need to pray about giving this over to the Lord. and being able to use these resources to make a very nice, presentable place, a place, I just thinking like, you gather on a Wednesday, on a Sunday night, and I'm thinking like, we don't have to do much of the setup here. It's going to be a huge blessing. But we got to put a lot of effort in at the beginning. So let's be in prayer about that. Daniel chapter number 7. Daniel chapter number 7. And we're going to try to get through the whole chapter this evening. And this is Daniel's dream, his first dream that we're looking at. And what we're going to do is we're going to try to move kind of quickly through some of the facts and explanations. And then hopefully we'll be able to tie this up at the very end with some encouragement for you all. Daniel chapter number 7, beginning in verse number 1. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. So Belshazzar was the guy who saw the writing on the wall. All right, so the narrative is taking a step back. And what Daniel did was he split his book in half. You'll remember the first half was the stories and the events that went from one emperor to the next emperor. And then he kind of backs up a little. Now the second half of the book, we're entering into prophecy land. And that's what he's doing right here. So this is backtracking a little bit. He's probably about 70 years old or so. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heavens strove upon the great sea, and four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse from one another. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, and it raised itself up on one side, and it had three ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it four wings of a fowl. The beast had also four heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly. And it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were three of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Now, that doesn't really need any explanation, so we'll just move on to the next. Yeah, right. Okay, let's begin this evening by looking at this first paragraph, the vision of the beasts. This is Daniel's dream. So far, he's interpreted dreams for Nebuchadnezzar. He's interpreted a message for Belshazzar and the writing on the wall. He hadn't yet done that by the time of his vision here, but here he comes now, 70 years old, and he's been given probably the most dramatic dream of the Old Testament, certainly up to this point. And it begins by speaking of the sea. And so when we consider what's going on here, it says the four winds beat against the sea. And as we learned in the book of Revelation, by the way, a lot of what we learn here ties to Revelation. So when you read Revelation and you see kind of some funny imagery, you come back to this place right here. And what would really do you some help is to just pick up a cross-reference Bible and you start finding out, sea was used over by Jeremiah, sea was used by Ezekiel, sea was used by Isaiah. And so it's a very common theme throughout the Bible to understand that the sea is a picture of the world. It's a picture of the nations. Isaiah 17, verse 12. Woe to the multitude of many people which make a noise like the noise of the seas, and to the rushing of nations that might make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee far off. Ezekiel 26:3 also says, Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Tyrus, that's a king, and will cause many nations to come up against thee, as the sea causes his waves to come up. So this picture, like we saw in Revelation, is a picture of the nations of mankind. Warren Wiersbe said, just as the waves and currents of the ocean are unpredictable, so the course of world history is beyond man's ability to chart or predict. Historians like Oswald Spengler and Arnold Toynbee have attempted to find a pattern to world history, but to no avail. From the human point of view, the nations seem to work out their own destinies, but the invisible winds of God blow over the surface of the waters to accomplish his will in his time. So you might go to the beach, and maybe you're a surfer, or maybe you can talk to a surfer about what it's like to go out and catch a wave, and they'll all tell you, you just go and you float and you wait until a wave comes along. And there's no predicting what the sea will do. And sure, you and I might get online and we might watch the radars and try to figure out what the oceans are doing. But even in our marvelous age of technology, we just have no idea. I mean, we evacuated for a hurricane this year that never came. We have no clue what the seas will do. And what we're taught here, though, is to us what is at work is the invisible four winds of the world. In other words, God is at work all the time. And that is the recurring theme of this chapter. Over and over throughout Daniel's vision here, he sees really terrifying stuff. I mean, this is a nightmare, what he is seeing. But the recurring theme is that God's in control. Sounds a lot like the book of Revelation, doesn't it? God is in control. So what we understand is that this sea is the habitat of the four beasts. This is where the beasts came from. Men may have worshiped the Caesars. They might have worshiped Nebuchadnezzar, but Daniel's vision indicates that those men are nothing more than tyrants that rise up from the tumultuous sea that is the world. Their thrones are as temporary as a wave. No matter how big that wave may be, even a tsunami, like Alexander the Great, is limited by his morality. It is a temporary wave. And these men, as great as they might seem, and as people lifted their name up and they plastered the name of Nebuchadnezzar all over the place, and as they worshiped the Caesars, as they called them gods, they certainly were not. And Daniel points out to us, nope, they just came up out of the seas like the rest of us. They're men risen out of the nations. They did not come down from heaven. And while each one of these kings and emperors greeted their kingdoms with peace, you remember that? Nebuchadnezzar, he writes a letter to everyone. He says, peace be with you. And we saw that with Darius too. He wrote a letter to his kingdom and he said the same thing, peace. But Daniel's telling us this sea has no peace. These men couldn't provide peace. And thank God for this nativity that we get to worship this time of year and really all the time, but we're reminded of the incarnation of Christ, who was the Prince of Peace. Christ did not rise up from the seas. Christ came from heaven. But there is no peace in the sea. So we see these beasts who come up out of the sea. And the first of all is the winged lion. The winged lion. Now, Babylon is often pictured as a lion and an eagle. In verse number 4, it says, the first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet of a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Jeremiah 49 says, behold, he shall come up like a lion from the swelling of Jordan against the habitation of the strong. Behold, he shall come up and fly as an eagle and spread his wings over Bozrah. All right, so get it? Here we're being taught, by the way, Jeremiah wasn't the only one to use that. That was said many times of Babylon. Babylon was as strong as a lion and soared as high as an eagle. Nebuchadnezzar's dream, you'll remember, pictured him as a high and lofty tree. You remember that? When Nebuchadnezzar had his nightmare, he saw this great big gigantic tree, as strong as a lion, as lofty as an eagle, and the tree stretched out, and the Bible tells us the leaves thereof were fair, and the fruit thereof was much, and it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, the fowls of the air dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. But the height and the strength of the tree, we could say the height and the strength of Babylon, this winged lion was still temporary. This lion was impressive. He was strong. This lion with wings, he could soar. But the dream continued on for Nebuchadnezzar. Remember this? It said, hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit. And what do we see in this dream? It says this lion with wings, he had his wings plucked. What happens to a lion when his wings get plucked? I don't know. Lions don't have wings. But when you pluck the wings of anything, it falls down to the ground. And so we find this, and obviously we've seen the story of Nebuchadnezzar play out, so this is really easy to see. Here you have this lion, it was high, it was powerful, and then the wings were plucked and was brought down, and it goes on, it says, and it was made to stand up with the feet of a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And so we would remember the whole story of Nebuchadnezzar. He was brought down like a beast, but then he was stood up again, and God put a man's heart back in him once more. And so this was very, very clearly King Nebuchadnezzar. Very clearly, this is Babylon. The widespread dominion had ceased, but thankfully for Nebuchadnezzar, he rose up off the ground. He received a man's heart. And clearly, this calls to memory the king's punishment as a wild beast. Now, this winged lion, the king of beasts, what we're seeing in this dream here of these four animals matches what Nebuchadnezzar dreamt of, the four inanimate metals. He had a dream of a great big image of a man. You remember that one? Back in chapter 2, it had a head of gold. It had a chest and arms of silver. It had legs of iron, a belly of brass, legs of iron. And what he envisioned in that matches what we're seeing here this evening. It's talking about four world powers, I think particularly the ones that opposed Israel. So many years before this dream, all the way back in Daniel chapter 2, while Daniel was still a young man, Daniel said, God hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth, and the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. So we're going to go ahead and we can take those images from that statue, and we can line it up with the animals we're going to see here tonight. First of all, you have the head of gold. Well, what animal is just the king of the jungle, right? What animal is the king that Disney even made a movie about? It's the Lion King, right? And so here you have him, the royal one. This is Nebuchadnezzar. This is Babylon. The king of the earth soared as an eagle, but remember this, it was only as God allowed. It was only as God allowed. And that's what this whole thing's about. Secondly, we see the devouring bear. The devouring bear. We see he stood up on one side. It says he has 3 ribs kind of stuck in between his teeth. And it says he was instructed to devour much flesh. This bear was ravenous. This bear was permitted by God to devour nations. Now, it was lopsided. It was risen up on one side. This reigning animal was, in fact, Media and Persia. This animal was the one that took over. In the first vision, it was the chest and the arms of silver. And I always kind of remember there's 2 arms there. So you have one side is Media, one side is Persia, and yet they were one nation that worked together. And that's what was going on here. And in fact, Media and Persia, they were united. And you'll even remember with the story of Darius. He signed a law according to the law of the Medes and the what? Persians. It's the law according to the Medes and the Persians. So there's a significance there. They had agreed that when the law was signed this way, let's say this king signed it, that king can't change it. There was this great big unifying factor between these nations, and they had an airtight unity pictured by 2 arms of silver, but indeed, it was lopsided. It was lopsided. Persia was a much more powerful nation. Persia was a much more power-hungry nation. And so here you have that this empire was the one that conquered Babylon. In chapter number 5, Belshazzar saw the handwriting on the wall. God told him, you've been weighed, you've been found wanting, you're going to be delivered tonight into the hands of the Medes and the Persians. And that very night, it was Persia that destroyed him. It was Persia that conquered the mighty Babylon. Now, some scholars, we don't really have like a pinpoint accuracy idea of what these 3 ribs mean. Right? Some people say these 3 ribs might be 3 major cities that the Medes and the Persians had conquered. Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt. Each one of those was conquered by the Medo-Persian army. On the other hand, some scholars believe that the ribs indicate that Persia devoured most but not all. So it's as if he was devouring some sort of a carcass and it couldn't quite get down those last 3 ribs. Sometimes it happens at 14 bones. You just get there and you order too much. You just can't quite get it all. And maybe that's the idea of the bear who couldn't quite finish his meal. I'm not sure. Either way you look at it, we understand the great, dominating, and violent nature of the devouring bear. His job was to destroy. Now, Nebuchadnezzar, he went around conquering, but man, did he build up an incredibly powerful and incredibly wealthy nation. I was hearing a podcast the other day that was talking about the marvels of the technology of Babylon. That kind of might seem a little weird to us, thinking how archaic it was, but Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon were contributors. And Greece that would follow were contributors, and Rome that would follow. They were all contributors, and yet the Medes and the Persians, really, they were just conquerors. They were known as the devouring one. They were destructive. Thirdly, you have the leopard of fours. The leopard of fours. He had 4 birds' wings, 4 heads, and he was promised dominion. In verse 6, I beheld, and lo, another, like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Alexander the Great would move so swiftly that his empire of Greece here is noted not as having 2 wings, like Nebuchadnezzar the lion, but as having 4 wings. Swiftly he moved. Alexander took the throne when he was only 20 years old. Alexander was tutored by Aristotle. Alexander was a very well-trained commander of the army. And so at 20 years of age, not only was he capable of receiving the throne when his father died, but in fact, they made him general of the army too. And so in the following 10 years, the man conquered a continent. It took this guy just 12 years. I mean, we're talking in a day and age before Rome even built highways, where you had to cut across the brush, where there was no such thing as a cell phone or an airstrike. This was ancient history, and in a very short amount of time, this incredibly smart commanding officer, Alexander the Great, conquered probably more than any of these other leaders. A single decade it only took him with just primitive technologies. But this swift jaguar, not only does it have 4 wings, indicating how swiftly it conquered, but it had 4 heads. And this is awesome, all right? This is really fun. Maybe Daniel understood this part. Maybe not, I don't know. But we have the benefit of now looking at history. We can look back and we can see what has transpired. Daniel never heard of the name Alexander the Great. Now, we do, of course, and we can look back and we say, what are these 4 heads? Now, check this out. Secular historian, not Christian historian, not Bible scholar, but a secular historian. By the way, all of them did. I checked out the University of Massachusetts, and this guy, secular historian Peter Green, in writing about Greece, he said this. He says, after Alexander's death, 40 years of war between the successors called the Diadochi settled the world into 4 stable powers: Egypt, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Macedon. After Alexander died, he had all sorts of powerful generals, all sorts of powerful successors and senators and so forth, and all these guys were vying for power, and what ended up happening is the nation split and basically was parted 4 ways. So this Greece became a 4-headed monster. And what Alexander had built up kind of separated and was torn to pieces. The same thing happened with Nebuchadnezzar. Really, the same thing happened with all these guys. Their nation crumbled without that one powerful leader at the top. Now, I want you to remember this. Remember that we have already seen that these creatures are rising up out of the sea. And we already know that the sea is a picture of being unpredictable. We're seeing that nobody had any idea. There's no way Daniel in his own wisdom could have prophesied that Belshazzar would get conquered that night. There's no way that Daniel could have said, there's coming a guy, Alexandros the Megas. I love that. Mega Alexander is so cool. I think we should call him that instead of Alexander the Great. Anyways, Alexandros the Mega, he came along and he was the guy that would swiftly take over the entire, almost the entire East. And of all this unpredictability, God has given Daniel a perfect prediction. God gave Daniel a prediction 300 years before it would happen. There's going to come a jaguar. It's going to be so swift, but it's going to have 4 heads. All this stuff is unfolding so perfectly. And so we can go right through these 3 world powers right here. And it is so accurate. The history here is so accurate that modern skeptics can only look at this and say, well, Daniel must have been written after all this took place. That's their best argument that they got. And say, oh, no, Daniel wasn't written by Daniel. Daniel must have been written sometime later, like maybe around the time of Christ, or maybe the Syriac, or something later, much later on. Babylon's wealth, Persia's ferocity, Greece's swiftness, and Rome's iron teeth. Ravi Zacharias holds the book of Daniel as the greatest prophetic proof of the Bible. And we're going to look now at the 4th beast, the terrible beast. It says in verse number 7, after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. This beast is so horrible that later on Daniel's going to come back and revisit this and give us a little bit more information. The 4th kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron that breaks all these things shall it break in pieces and bruise. Iron indicates Rome. Rome was known for creating the Iron Age. Rome lasted over 1,000 years, far longer than Babylon, far longer than Greece and Persia. Rome lasted well into the medieval times. Rome lasted a millennium, and Rome was chaotic. As much as he saw this animal just pulverizing everything in its path and destroying, and we might think of the head of gold that had its wealth, and you might think of the way that some of these, the Grecians, they created the university system, and they created certain ways of education that we still use today. Even the way I'm preaching right now is in large part to how Greece taught how to teach. And so many of these nations, they gave and they gave and they gave, and yet it was this nation of Rome, this 4th world power that was so destructive, turning everything in its path to dust. As powerful as the Caesars were, they were never able to quite succeed because of the Republic. Rome was situated differently than the first 3 world powers. The first 3 world powers, what Nebuchadnezzar said went. It was a total monarchy. But in the day of Rome, it was indeed a republic. The senators had a lot of power, and the senators had a lot of say-so. So as powerful as the Caesars were, they weren't quite able to have that single-headed leadership. Senators, popes, and czars, where the word Caesar comes from, they were constantly at odds with one another. And for millennia, they have just pulverized nations. But in Nebuchadnezzar's dream, you'll remember that we have the head of gold, we have the silver, then we have the brass, and then you have the legs. Now, who can remember all the way back? Those legs would eventually reach the feet, and they mingled with what? It didn't quite mix. It was the clay. It was the clay. By the time you got down to his toes, he had 10 clay toes. But that iron and that clay, they just didn't quite mix. And that's a very good picture of Rome's history. There wasn't quite that amalgamation that was needed, that like the head of gold had. The terrible beast lives on today through the Roman Catholic Church. The first 3, they were conquered. Babylon is done and over with. Persia, Greece, they were conquered by the subsequent empires, but Rome never was. Nobody came in and defeated Rome. You had guys like their leader Constantinople, who kind of just began to shift things over towards this fake Christianity that is now the Roman Catholic Church. And so it's shifted, and it's become from iron more into this crumbling clay. And one day there is coming this one little horn that's going to usurp the 10 horns, and that one little horn is going to make itself grand. In fact, we're going to see him again in chapter number 8. But it is through this system that the Antichrist will come to rise. And that is what we're talking about with this little horn. This little horn's weird. It's a horn that has eyes and a mouth. It is strange. That's strange. And this little horn uproots 3 horns. I don't know what that means. If you read the Left Behind series, it was assassination, okay? But who knows what that means? You have this one little horn who usurps 3 horns, and he becomes great big, and he has eyes, and the eyes indicate his wisdom. This Antichrist figure is going to have a great deal of understanding, worldly wisdom, not godly wisdom. He's going to have a great deal of understanding, and not only that, but he has a mouth. And he's going to be so persuasive. He's going to be able to communicate to the world which direction it's going. Paul talked about this in 2 Thessalonians 2. He says, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day, the Lord's day, shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed. The son of perdition. My soul, what a title that is. That word perdition is like the word sin. The son of perdition is what the Antichrist is called. He opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Even him whose coming is after the workings of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders. Look, man, when we talk about this little horn who had eyes of wisdom and a mouth of persuasion, Paul says he is going to have all the workings of Satan with all of Satan's power and with all of Satan's miracles and lying wonders and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish. Anybody who's lost, anybody who's unsaved is going to listen to this little horn with a mouth. They're all going to listen as this thing becomes the Antichrist. So where's the Antichrist coming from? Out of the 4th kingdom. You say, so does that mean that the Antichrist is from Rome? Maybe, if that's actually Rome. Maybe, maybe not. There is some disagreement on that. But we do know one thing, is that this 4th and final kingdom is dramatically different from the other ones. But I want to, as we notice this, we can probably mark down, we can say, yeah, history would tell us that like these 4 world powers really line up with the description of these animals. But it does teach us that there is coming a throne that is above every throne, and the Ancient of Days is going to exalt himself. So I think that's what we need to go to next. First of all is the visions of the beasts, but second of all is the victory of the Lord. Let's move quickly into verse number 9. The Bible says, I beheld till the thrones, what thrones? The thrones of these kingdoms. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as the burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him. So look, all this lines up with what we've heard about God in the book of Revelation. I mean, the first description we get of Jesus in Revelation chapter 1 is Jesus' white hair, his white beard, his white glory. He is ancient. He is the Ancient of Days. So the reason that God can look out and can say, hey, you've got these coming 4 world powers is because God is the Alpha and the Omega. God is outside of time, looking in at the whole timeline. It is as simple for God to talk about the future as it is for us to talk about the present. God is above all these things. And here we see the Ancient of Days, and he's upon his throne, and his throne has wheels. I don't know, maybe that means it's like a chariot or something like that. It says a fiery stream came from before him, and remember his throne in heaven has lightning issuing from it. And then he has thousands, and 10,000s times 10,000s who minister with him. There's this great host of angels that are with him. And the judgment was set and the books opened. And he goes about judging and destroying and having dominion. So we're taught about the Ancient of Days. We're taught about the angels. Now, check this out. We all know that Moses received the 10 Commandments up on Mount Sinai. And if you remember the story, you remember he walked up into a storm cloud. It was storming so much it shook the mountain. Listen to what Moses recorded in Deuteronomy 33. He said, the Lord came from Sinai and rose up from Seir unto them. He shined forth from Mount Paran, and he came with 10,000s of his holy ones, his saints. From his right hand went a fiery law for them. So when Moses met God on the Mount Sinai, there were 10,000 angels up there with him. Powerful, powerful presence. And it's not that God needs 10,000 angels to do his judgment, but what God provides is 10,000 witnesses. See, Moses wasn't up there in secret, like, carving out his own 10 commandments in the midst of a thunderstorm. And it wasn't just God speaking with Moses in private. There were 10,000 witnesses. God's writing his law, and there's 10,000 angels that would raise their hand and say, yeah, I was there. I saw the law. And you know what? When you and I die, and when we pass and we stand before judgment, guess what? 10,000 witnesses are going to be up there. They saw it. They are eyewitnesses. And so when he comes to judge Antichrist, the witnesses are there too. The witnesses says, no, yeah, the holy God wrote the law. We were there. We saw it. We can attest to the law. And when God opens the books and judges the nations, it's not just, the nation's word against God on his throne. Moreover, it's including thousands upon thousands upon thousands of angels. There's a great many witnesses surrounding this. And then it goes on to say the books were open. You see, this is a perfect legal case. Our God is totally just. Everything about this, it talks about the whiteness of his throne, the fire going before him, everywhere the wheels of his throne go, it leaves everything in fire. I mean, there is a holiness to our God. He is totally just. And this is a perfect witness case. I mean, it's telling us the judge is seated. He is fiery and white, perfectly holy. There are 10,000 witnesses. Okay, that's a pretty big jury, right? And the law is read. Now get this. This is really something to consider. In verse number 13, I want to pick this up before I begin. In verse number 13, it says, I saw in the night visions, behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. And they brought him near before him, and there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, and all peoples, nations, and languages should serve Jesus. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. The first three emperors, Nebuchadnezzar, Darius, and Alexander, they were not immediately judged by God. Oh, sure, God changed the heart of Nebuchadnezzar, but look at those guys. None of those guys were destroyed by God. All of them died of natural causes, as far as we understand. But the fourth emperor, the Antichrist, he's given 3.5 years, and then he is destroyed by the ancient fiery one. One commentary points out, check this out. I just really want to try to get across how kind of monumental this is. One commentary points this out. It is striking the fourth monarchy, though Christianized for 1,500 years past. Okay, so this commentary, he's saying this fourth beast that we just saw, the fourth beast that we think is Rome, he says it's been Christianized for the past 50, since Constantinople, has made it like this Christendom, and it's, spread itself all over the world. It is not distinguished from the previous heathen monarchies. And it's not distinguished from its own heathen portion. Nay, it is represented as the most God-opposed of all, and culminating at last is in blasphemous Antichrist. In other words, this last monarch is so horrific, it goes beyond anything Nebuchadnezzar ever did. It goes beyond anything that Alexander the Great ever did. It is, in fact, using the name of Christianity to further its own blasphemous kingdom. And so this is the fourth and most horrible beast, and it tells us here that after a brief 3.5 years, the Lord will take it out. Now, we understand as we look at this, you have these three heathen kings, these three men who were political in nature, who were military in nature. They were not stopped immediately in their tracks by God. But the fourth one, Jesus Christ is going to deal personally with the Antichrist. Oh, it's not even going to be like Herod, who was eaten of worms and died. It's not going to be like somebody who was struck down in the midst of battle like King Saul. This is somebody whom Jesus Christ will deal with personally. He is that evil, and this is how serious God is about it. We are not taught that we will Christianize the world in the way that Rome has gone about creating a false Christendom. Rome has gone about and it has created its own religious state, its own religious nation, with its own borders, its own laws, really its own operations. They have perverted what Jesus Christ taught. Look, Jesus Christ taught you and me, we are not of the world. And it's been this fourth kingdom that has been going around saying, well, no, we're just going to make the world look a little bit more Christian. And that's presented itself as the Crusaders and all sorts of heinous things throughout the centuries. We are not of this world. Our job is not to go about making some kind of a throne. God has the throne all covered. And it's not our job to go create some sort of a papacy. We're not supposed to create some sort of a system like that. The kingdom of Christ, let me just sum this up like this. The kingdom of Christ will not look like a nation until Jesus returns. The kingdom of Christ is like, people in every nation, kindred, and tongue who are singing his praise to him. Sometimes underground, sometimes in secret, sometimes opposed, sometimes lazily, sometimes wealthy. It doesn't even matter. We're kind of every shade under the rainbow. Here we are all across the world lifting up the name of God, but it will never look like a nation until Jesus Christ himself returns. That's the plan. So the church isn't about like sterilizing the world. It's about evangelizing the lost. God will purge the world one day, but for now, our job is to get people out of the darkness, out of the world. Not like shifting the world around and kind of rearranging things. No, come out of the world and be ye separate. And then finally, we see the violence of the Antichrist. In verse number 15, Daniel is grieved. Daniel's received the vision. He's like still in the vision, and he is totally grieved. He is sick to his stomach. He's not going to be able to eat or sleep for days. In verse 15, I was grieved in my spirit in the middle of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. And I came near unto one of them that stood by, like some kind of an angelic being, some heavenly creature. I came by unto one of them that stood by, and I asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. He said, these great beasts, which are four kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess it forever, even forever and ever. So Daniel's first question, he says, what is going on? Daniel sees the bear, he sees the jaguar, he sees this fourth beast. And I'm not real big into like using pictures. I don't necessarily think it's probably a good idea to use some other man's interpretation of what these things look like. But if you Google it, all right, this fourth beast, man, I've seen people draw it like dinosaurs. I've seen people draw it like werewolves. People have drawn it as all sorts of crazy looking critters. I don't know what Daniel saw, but he was just shocked. Like, Daniel doesn't ask about the first three anymore. Because he knew Nebuchadnezzar. He'd seen that guy's kingdom come and go. Oh, yeah, the lion, he's done. He's about to see the Medes and Persians. He's about to see Darius. He doesn't really care. Those guys, they're like common dictators. They're like the common murderous tyrant. But the fourth one, he asks in verse number 19, he says, I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse. He was different from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue of his feet, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. So Daniel's looking on going, yeah, I've seen Nebuchadnezzar. He ripped us from our home. He put us into Babylon. He changed my life forever. But he's not shaking his boots about the lion. He's shaking his boots about the fourth one. He says this one's way worse. And that little Antichrist horn that springs up and becomes so great, he says he prevails against the saints. He is horrified by what he's seeing. Verse 22, until the Ancient of Days came and the judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the angel said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all other kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and it shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after it, and he shall be different from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and dividing of times. That means this guy's going to have free reign for 3.5 years. Time is 1 year. Times is 2 years, and half a time, 3.5 years. That's used elsewhere. But the judgment shall sit. I think chapter 9, we see it again. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it forever. So here's the point. Daniel seems to understand the first 3 creatures. He's like, yeah, I've seen Nebuchadnezzar. It's horrible. The other guys that are coming along, they're not even as high up as Nebuchadnezzar was. But wow, this 4th beast. And he's really getting into this thing, and so he finds the nearest angel. Hey, buddy, come here. What was that? He says, this is worse. And not only is it just horrifying, not only is he able to conquer all of the other kings, he's conquering the saints. Look, this is the same Daniel who his friends came out of the fiery furnace, not able to be conquered. This is the same Daniel that would be pitched into a lion's den. Daniel didn't fret the lion's den. But Daniel sees an Antichrist that will prevail against the saints. And I want you to take heart right now, because it seems like he's persisting in asking about Antichrist. This 4th ruler, he's terrifying, he's horrible. And he keeps asking. And every time, each of these times that the angel responds, he says, all right, here's the truth. He's a bad dude. He is the worst of the worst. He is the ultimate king of men. He is the ultimate beast come out of the sea. But he says this every time. Look at verse 26. He says, but the judgment shall sit. Every time the angel speaks, he says, yeah, he's really bad, but it's not forever. He's going to have a time on earth. He's going to have his way. He gets to change the times and see whatever he wants. If he says we're changing the calendar, we're changing the calendar. I mean, this guy, he has total say-so, but the judgment's coming. The judgment sits. You cannot change the judgment of God in heaven. So after all, and he's horrified by what he sees, and he continues to persist in asking, but each time the description is given, friends, good news follows. Don't you remember this is how the pattern of Revelation was? The pattern of Revelation was there's the throne. That's horrible. There's the throne. This is horrible. God is on his throne. Everything's running amok. Everything is horrible down here, but God's in control. And the way this whole chapter started out was with the 4 winds that swept across the sea. The Holy Spirit's in total control. God's in total control. And the angel says, look, yeah, it's really bad, but the judgment still sits. You can't change the law of God. All that matters is that you are on the Lord's side. The beast is alarming. He is nightmarish. He is strong. But his end, the Antichrist's end, will be the most destructive end the world has ever seen. Remember that. He wages far more damage, far more war than any of the other leaders, but none of those other leaders were conquered the way that Jesus Christ will conquer this one. The same horn made war, but the judgment shall sit. Verse 27, the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. How long does the Antichrist kingdom last? 3.5 years. 3.5 years. It's a pretty good kingdom. Guy's going to have a sweet jet, all those things that come with the kingdom. For 3.5 years. But that's going to be given to the saints, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. Hitherto is the end of my matter. As for me, Daniel, my cogitations much trouble me, and my countenance changed in me, but I kept the matter in my heart. The violence of Antichrist is against God's people, but for those who suffer violence are always promised victory. And I close with Romans 8:18. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. Heavenly Father, thank you for your unchanging throne. You are high and lifted up, Lord, and we've read tonight about some men that would seem very powerful in our eyes. They would seem very authoritative in our presence. Help us, God, to look with eyes of faith that we might see heaven and that we might be reminded of the God who is surrounded by thousands upon thousands of angels, 10,000 times 10,000 witnesses, the God whose law stands. I pray that we would walk in fear of God. Would we understand that to those that would suffer the violence of this world are promised victory in Jesus. Thank you, God. You are the Ancient of Days. You are so great and powerful, and help us to remember that always. Thank you, Jesus. I pray this in your precious name. Amen.